If you're a songwriter, then you're probably familiar with this scenario. You have a great inspired idea and you record it and you love it, but then you get stuck. Nothing you try seems to work, it just doesn't feel right, and you wait for another flash of inspiration to help you finish the song, but it never comes. And in the end, that great idea just remains a fragment and it joins your whole collection of other fragments. I'm going to share with you my melody-based techniques that you can use when you feel stuck when you're writing a song. Why melody-based? Because like Max Martin, I believe melody is king. And if you have a strong melody that's well structured and well balanced, then everything else will kind of fall into place. But before we get to that, let's talk about inspiration. By the way, before I forget, I have a little gift for you, which I'm going to tell you about at the end of this video, so stick around because you'll want to hear about that. If you'd rather get straight to my tools for getting unstuck, then skip ahead to the next chapter in this video, but I would like to get in a few words about inspiration first. Now, anyone who is creative has their own view on inspiration, but in my experience, there are a lot of songwriters who believe that everything they write has to come from a place of inspiration. I'm always surprised when there are people who vehemently claim that you can't learn songwriting, that you just have to feel it and just express yourself and just do what feels right. Yes, songwriting is a form of expression, but it is also a craft, and a craft can be learned. Let's compare it to cooking. Anyone can throw together a couple of ingredients and call it cooking. They might even have a truly original idea and it might be really tasty. But if they don't have any skills and know-how, then it's likely just luck. Sure, there are a couple of geniuses out there, but most of us are just regular people. And if you want to become a better cook, then you need to be willing to learn. You need to study the techniques and you need to acquire the knowledge about flavors and whatever. And then, when you've got to the point where you can combine these skills with inspired ideas, then you are a truly great chef. We all know the famous quote attributed to Thomas Edison: "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." But I also love these other quotes. "Amateurs wait for inspiration. The real pros get up and go to work." Inspiration is one thing and you can't control it, but hard work is what keeps the ship moving. Without craftsmanship, inspiration is a mere reed shaken in the wind. And one more thing for you to think about. When Lady Gaga says that she wrote Poker Face in 10 minutes, or that she wrote Born This Way and Let's Dance in 10 minutes each, don't be fooled into thinking that that necessarily means they were born out of pure inspiration. Sure, they were probably based on flashes of inspiration, but in combination with her years of honing her songwriting craft. So don't get misled by the time it takes. ABBA, for example, wrote only 12 songs a year, even at their peak, which means that they sweated over each song for a full month. So the ideal situation is inspiration combined with solid craftsmanship. Usually there's a flash of inspiration, that initial spark that gets us going in the first place. But no matter how great that idea is, there's still a chance that you might get stuck and not know how to move forward. And if you're serious about songwriting, you can't just sit around waiting for inspiration to strike again. So I want to give you some practical tips to help you get unstuck and back into the creative flow. I've found that songwriters and students who get stuck usually don't have a clear picture of what they've actually done so far, what they already have. Because they started their song off with an idea that just came to them or that was possibly inspired, they usually don't really have a deep understanding of what they've done. So my number one tip for you is to take a close look at what you've actually done so far. Let's just say you had a great idea for a chorus and now you're struggling to find a suitable verse. So first of all, you're going to actually write your melody down. I'd say the easiest way is just to create a MIDI track and record it in your DAW, which will then display it to you. Once you actually have that visual representation of your melody, I recommend taking notes about some key characteristics about it. Let's start at the beginning. Where does your melody begin? Does it start on the first beat of the first bar? Or does it start before it with a pickup? Or does it start at a later point? Whichever is true for you, start the melody of your next section at a different point in the bar. This might seem like a minor detail, but it can actually make a huge difference because it already starts the next section out differently and gives it a different character. Next, let's look at the note values in your section. What are the predominant note values you've used up to here? Have you used longish note values like quarter notes, half notes, or rather shorter ones like eighth notes and 16th notes? Whichever you find in your melody, try using different note values in the next section to create variety. And you don't even need to go to extremes, maybe including just one longer note in the phrases in your next section can balance out a section where you maybe used lots of shorter notes. And this point also includes rests. Don't forget about the rests. If the section you have doesn't have a lot of rests, then you might want to include more rests in the next section to give your listeners a bit of relief and a bit of a breather. And a general note, when you're trying out these techniques, it's often enough just to use them in small doses. After all, we want variety to keep listeners interested, but we don't want the next section to sound like a completely different song. So just play around with these suggestions as a way to help you get unstuck and to maybe give you new ideas and ultimately get you to the finish line. The next point is related to the note values. Take a look at your melody and see whether it tends to use straight rhythms or a lot of syncopated rhythms. If you've mainly used straight notes like straight eighths or straight quarter notes, then play around with some syncopations in your next section. This means putting emphasis on notes in the bar that are usually unaccented, and this technique tends to create drive and excitement. Next, look at your phrase lengths. Have you used short phrases like, let's say, 2-bar phrases or even 1-bar phrases? Or are they longer? Do they extend across 4 bars or 8 bars? Whichever one is true for your section, I highly recommend using different phrase lengths in the next section. And then look at how much repetition you've used. How often do you repeat a certain phrase or a certain motive? If you find that you've used a lot of repetition in your section up to here, then think about writing phrases with a bit less repetition in the next section or breaking up repetition by inserting variations every now and again. And if the opposite is true and you find you have very little repetition, then now would be the time to think about including more repetition. Next, look at the type of motion you've used in your melody. Have you repeated the same note a lot in your tune? Or have you used interval jumps? Or maybe you've used a step-by-step motion or more of an arpeggio kind of motion. Try integrating a different kind of motion in your next section. And if you discover that your existing melody is kind of all over the place and uses a mix of different kinds of motion, then it would be a good idea to focus on only one kind of motion in the next section. This will then bring a much needed sense of structure at that point and help to streamline your song. Next, range and register. What's the range and the register of the section you have? Whatever it is, you could vary it a bit in the next section. But don't overdo it. Most of the time it's enough to vary your range and your register by just 1 or 2 steps. And also the chorus needn't be the highest part of your song. And the last point is tension. Look at your melody notes in relation to the chords that you've written with them. Have you generally used chord notes, meaning the notes of the triad of the chord under the melody? Then in your next section, incorporate some non-triad notes or some extended chord notes like the 2nd, the 4th, the 6th, the 7th to create some tension. This is a fantastic way to give each section a distinctive character because these notes add a particular flavor and a sense of excitement and interest. Melodies that stick to triad notes are in danger of sounding generic, so it is well worth your time to play around with these tension notes. Now, as far as harmony goes, when you're stuck, I really recommend just sticking with the chords you have and focusing on developing your melody. You can always add more chords or different chords at a later point. In fact, I love doing that because that process in itself, again, brings new ideas. But for now, I'd recommend just focusing on the melody. If your melody has enough variety, then you can just use the same chord pattern throughout. Now, to sum up, my approach is to ride the wave of inspiration as far as it can take me. But when the wave has ended, that's when craft comes into play. Craft is the thing that can get you to the finish line. And what's more, craft can serve to open up the floodgates for a new wave of inspiration, which is very exciting because then often you get ideas that you wouldn't even have considered at the beginning. If you have stuck with me up to here, I've got a little gift for you, which is a checklist that covers all of these points I've just gone through. You can download it from the link I'm putting in the description below. If you found this video helpful, I'd really love for you to subscribe to my channel. That would really help me out a lot. For now, Bussi Baba, and see you next time.